In April 1906, Albert Henry Gary, the ambitious chairman of U.S. Steel, stood at a barren plot on Lake Michigan's southern shore, hammer in hand and vision in mind. With one decisive strike into the ground, he birthed a city that bore his name, Gary, Indiana. Here, just 30 miles from Chicago, lay a city with promise, chosen for its proximity to raw materials, transportation routes, and booming markets. Gary was built to be an industrial titan, a place of opportunity and prosperity. But as the years rolled by, this beacon of American industry faded, leaving a haunting question. How did Gary, once a thriving steel city, become an emblem of abandonment? Let's find out. By the early 1900s, the US had become a steel powerhouse, producing 25 million tons annually. However, fierce competition from countries like Germany, Japan, and Great Britain meant that the US had to find a way to maintain its lead. Enter Gary Works, US Steel's massive mill complex, built strategically to dominate the steel market. As the economy boomed, the demand for workers surged. People from rural areas moved to cities like Gary in search of better jobs, contributing to the mill's rapid growth and the social changes it brought with it. Gary quickly became the country's fastest-growing city. By 1921, its population had surpassed 50,000, doubling in just a decade as waves of immigrants arrived seeking work. Immigrants and their American-born children made up 45% of the population in 1930, while blacks constituted almost 18%. The city's impressive infrastructure, churches, schools, hospitals, and civic buildings stood as shining examples of prosperity. U.S. Steel established the Gary Land Company to manage planning, zoning, and the sale of homes and land. Employees could purchase property outright or secure financing through a local bank, although ownership was typically reserved for management, foremen, and skilled laborers. The city was marketed as the Magic City and the City of the Century, living up to the hype with its rapid growth and thriving economy. However, beneath the surface of Gary's success lay significant social and economic challenges. The influx of first-generation immigrants from Italy, Greece, Poland, Russia, and the Balkans, alongside African Americans migrating from the Deep South, created a diverse but divided population. By the late 1920s, nearly half of Gary's residents were immigrants or their American-born children, many of whom lived in poverty and worked in the least skilled, lowest-paying jobs. In contrast, the city's management and higher-skilled workers were predominantly native-born Americans, Englishmen, and Irishmen, leading to a rigid social stratification. Gary's South Side was marked by overcrowded, unsanitary conditions and vices like gambling and public drunkenness, which led to high disease rates, with typhoid, malaria, and tuberculosis affecting many. The North Side, however, had affluent neighborhoods with tree-lined streets and beautiful homes, creating a stark divide. This contrast fueled tensions and social inequality, sowing the seeds for future issues. By the 1920s, Gary Works had grown into America's largest steel mill, powering the economy through World War II and the 1950s with a massive output of steel for global construction and manufacturing. While Gary's industrial strength was undeniable, it came at a high human cost. Working conditions were harsh, long hours, low pay, and dangerous environments, particularly for minority workers who faced discrimination. The Great Steel Strike of 1919 showed how discontent was growing, with thousands of workers demanding better conditions. Though there were some improvements, trust in unions was weak. By the 1950s, Gary thrived, but rising costs and foreign competition, along with automation, began to take a toll. The mill struggled to adapt, and the city's economy began to decline despite its previous success. By the early 1970s, layoffs at Gary Works became a common occurrence, signaling the start of a long, slow decline. Thousands of factory workers were let go, and the ripple effects were felt throughout the community. As jobs disappeared, the phenomenon of white flight took hold. White residents moved to suburban areas in search of better opportunities and safer neighborhoods, leaving behind low-paying jobs for minority populations. African Americans from Chicago and other nearby cities moved to Gary, drawn by the prospect of work, but found themselves in a city grappling with economic stagnation and social upheaval. The economic downturn extended beyond the steel mills. Regional businesses that had once thrived by supplying goods and services to Gary Works began to close, further shrinking the city's tax base and exacerbating the decline. By the late 1970s, Gary was increasingly characterized as a grimy, struggling city. Business Insider even labeled Gary as the most miserable city in America, a title that reflects the city's painful downfall. In 1972, Time magazine described Gary as a grimy-ass sheep, highlighting the pervasive sense of decay and desperation. Despite the continued operation of Gary Works, the mill's significance had diminished, and the city's population had dwindled from its peak of 175,000 to just over 100,000 by the late 1980s. The 1980s brought even harsher realities. Indiana's steel mills, once the backbone of Gary's economy, were responsible for only a quarter of all steel produced in the United States. The workforce at Gary Works had plummeted from 30,000 to less than 8,000. Nearby industrial hubs like Pittsburgh and Baltimore had also experienced similar declines, with numerous mills downsized, sold, or closed entirely. The Midwest and Mid-Atlantic regions faced widespread job losses, union contracts were aggressively renegotiated, and businesses continued to shutter, leaving behind a landscape of abandoned factories and deserted storefronts. By the early 1990s, Gary had earned the dubious title of the per capita murder capital of America. In 1993 alone, the city of nearly 120,000 recorded 110 killings, resulting in a murder rate of 91 per 100,000 residents, more than triple that of nearby Chicago. This spike in violence was a direct consequence of the economic collapse. As opportunities vanished, crime and despair surged, creating a cycle that was difficult to break. The city's infrastructure had crumbled, with nearly a quarter of its buildings officially abandoned. Empty hospitals, schools, churches, and museums became the last refuges for addicts, alcoholics, and the chronically unemployed, turning Gary into a ghost town in many respects. Ironically, Gary Works remained the city's largest employer, even as the rest of the economy faltered. In 2020, the mill produced nearly 8 million tons of steel, a fraction of its former output, but still significant for the local economy. However, this was not enough to sustain Gary's population, which had dwindled to around 75,000 residents. The city's demographic had shifted to being nearly 80% African American, a stark contrast to its diverse immigrant roots. Today, nearly 40% of Gary's residents live in poverty, a testament to the long-lasting impact of industrial decline and economic mismanagement. Gary has faced numerous challenges in its efforts to revive its economy. The city has tried attracting investment with incentives and initiatives, like the modern $45 million stadium for the Gary Railcats. But progress has been slow. While leadership changes, including mayors Richard Gordon Hatcher and Karen Marie Freeman Wilson, focused on development, most revitalization efforts have not succeeded. In 2017, Freeman Wilson even pitched Gary as a potential site for Amazon's world headquarters, but the offer was declined. The city's transformation remains difficult, and skepticism continues due to the deep-rooted challenges it faces. Gary's decline mirrors the broader deindustrialization trend that swept through America's Rust Belt in the latter half of the 20th century. Cities that were once bustling centers of manufacturing struggled to adapt to a post-industrial economy, facing similar challenges of job loss, population decline, and economic hardship. The story of Gary serves as a cautionary tale about the dangers of over-reliance on a single industry and the importance of economic diversification. In the end, Gary, Indiana, stands as a monument to both the possibilities and pitfalls of industrialization. Its rise as a steel titan brought prosperity and growth, but its downfall underscores the fragility of economies dependent on a single industry. For the residents who remain, Gary is not just a place of abandonment. It is home, with a history that continues to shape their lives and a future that, while uncertain, is still filled with hope. That's it for today. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.